Dating all the way back to 1979, the Alien franchise has given us one of the most iconic characters put to screen in Ripley, who's had to go face to face with one of the best creature designs ever created in Hollywood history, and the Xenomorph, with some of the best directors sharing their stories in space with both horror and action leading the way. Now from there we saw two franchises that I'm a fan of face off in a lackluster outing in my opinion, in Alien vs Predator, but then we got the return of Ridley Scott and his prequels as we met new crews with David the android who came across the creators, aka the engineers. But now we're back in this somewhat standalone sequel set between the events of Alien and Aliens, brought to us by one of my favorite directors. But the question is, does this live up to the expectations of what's come before? Is this one of the best sequels in the franchise? But more importantly, is this film worth checking out in theaters? Well, we'll be discussing that and much more in today's spoiler-free review of Alien Romulus. But first, let's get the conversation going in the comments below. Are you a fan of the Alien franchise? And if so, which film is your favorite and least favorite? But more importantly, let's talk about Alien Romulus. What worked, what didn't work? Share your thoughts on the direction, the story, the performances, the ending of the film. Did that work? Did it not work for you? And when you have seen this and you walked out of the theater, where would you place this film in your personal rankings in the franchise? Let's talk about it all in the comments below. I was a fan of this franchise, but also a huge fan of Fede Álvarez. Like, I was super excited to see this movie because going back to Fede, I love what he did with 2013's Evil Dead. It is my personal favorite film in that wonderful franchise. I love what he did with Don't Breathe, and I went back and I revisited Alien and Aliens. I didn't go watch Alien 3 because I'm not the biggest fan of that film, or Resurrection, but I'll watch those later in the week to kind of give you all my own personal ranking. But I want to get back in that headspace, pun intended, while leaning up into my early screening. So here it is. Is the film good? Is it bad? Is it great? Is it somewhere in the middle? Well, let's kick things off by starting off with my positives, and I want to talk about the man behind the camera, the director and the co-writer himself, Fede Álvarez. I really thought that Fede delivered a thrilling and horror sci-fi film that finds a creative way to blend elements of the classic 1979 Alien with the 1986 Aliens, but also manages to put his own stamp on this franchise in this film as well. Which actually, to that last point, I felt this movie had some elements of a style, what we've seen in Don't Breathe, and it kind of has a mixture of 2014's video game by the name of Alien Isolation, which by the way was extremely overlooked, but Fede definitely put an emphasis on the survival aspect of that game and really played into the making the xenomorphs and the facehuggers and his chest bursters actually scary again. I'll speak to this point a little bit later in the review, but there were moments where I feel like Fede leaned a little bit too much and paying some homage to what came before and playing a little bit too much to nostalgia, but I do think overall this was a good mixture, and it kind of reminded me of 2019's Dr. Sleep and what Mike Flanagan did with that film. And again, tying it to Fede Álvarez, they're acknowledging the past, they're paying homage to the past, they're recreating certain iconic moments within the franchise, but then they're also managing to put their own creative spin to this franchise, to their individual film. And going back to this film, Fede does have moments where he's injecting his sensibilities, he's injecting his skill set into the film, especially when we get to that third act, which is just absolutely brutal. Now, I personally think that 2013 Evil Dead is my personal favorite film of Fede Álvarez to date because it's just way more brutal and gory as hell. I just really love that film. But I will say I think that this film, Alien Romulus, may be his best made film from a craftsmanship perspective and a director's perspective, which actually leads me into one of, if not the best element of this movie, which was the incredible production value. I want to give all the praise to the production team and crew for fitting perfectly into the already established world created over 40 years ago. From the designs of the ships to the weaponry to the equipment all used, it just fits so well in this established world. I thought the sound design was truly remarkable and unique and blended perfectly with the atmosphere they created and really captured the spirit of the original films, which was a horror movie, and every element of the sound design is absolutely incredible. And I also loved how much practice practical effects were being used in this film because it makes it feel real. It makes the film feel alive and just makes everything feel more realistic, and you're not distracted by terrible CGI. Now, I do think Prometheus is like the best looking film in the Alien franchise from like a visual presentation. Like, that film is absolutely stunning, but Alien Romulus is definitely in the conversation because this is also a beautiful looking film. Like, there are just shots that are just absolutely breathtaking, especially when we get these shots looking outside of space and how they capture the scope of space and also the emptiness of it all, and seeing that on the IMAX screen and having the sound design mixed into that, it was just an amazing experience in general, and it's just, again, a beautiful film to look at. Now, switching gears and talking about the performances, at this point I've seen just about almost everything that the 26-year-old Cailee Spaeny has been in, and I'm just convinced that there's nothing she can't do or any role that she can't play. Now, Cailee plays a character by the name of Rain who's living on this planet with very deadly conditions and just wants to move into a better place with her brother Andy, but of course she gets caught in between taking this particular job that could get her to that position, but then she comes across the aliens and she has to survive against all odds. To me, she's the best character, and I was absolutely bought into her as a character who's able to think quick on her feet in these troubling and life-threatening situations. She's also someone who's willing to fight for those she cares about, and when push comes to shove, she can kick into survival mode, and I definitely bought into her kind of playing into that Ripley character, and she was just so believable in the role. I also want to shine some light on the character Andy, played by David Jonsson, another great up-and-coming star part of this cast who's had a great career this far, as he's given the task of having somewhat of a dual role, as he definitely plays more into the dramatic side of this particular story, which actually plays into a common theme that we've seen in Fede Álvarez's films before, with it being siblings protecting one another, but also he gets to be the voice of reason at points, and which creates a bit of a riff of this dynamic in the group. But again, I thought that David did a really solid job in his role. And to me, together those two, Cailee and David, really carry a lot of the weight of this film. Like, they carry the dramatic scenes, they have the best dramatic moments, they also play a lot into the action, and together, like I said, they were the driving force of this film. I'll also say that Isabela Merced is good in this movie, but I also found her character to be more of a plot device more than a fleshed out character, but I thought that she did the most with her limited character development. Now, last points before getting to my criticisms, I really loved how creative Fede and the team got when it came to some sequences and taking things that we've seen before in the franchise and putting their own spin to it. For example, we all know as Alien fans that when you get that alien blood on you, it is very deadly because it is acid. So I love, without giving too much away, there's a scene that really plays into avoiding the blood that is very tense filled. It reminded me a lot of a video game, like I mentioned, the Alien Isolation video game. Very cool scene, but also, again, taking things we've seen before and putting their own spin to it. The facehuggers, we all know they're very abrasive, very scary, and when they get on you, you're pretty much a wrap, and I love how they kind of play with the gore of the facehuggers. But speaking of gore, not giving anything away, but there is a new spin on the chest bursters, and all I'll say is it's a mixture of Prometheus with the Shaw character. It definitely has homages to Fede's previous work with Evil Dead. Like, think of Evil Dead and the turkey baster from Don't Breathe times 10. Like, that is a very memorable scene, and there are very great memorable scenes that definitely kind of goes into the category in the Hall of Fame of just things I'll never forget from this franchise. Now, something also I want to mention, I got to see this on the premiere night, so I don't know how other people feel about this, and I'm referring to the third act of the film. I thought the ending of this movie, and I'm referring to like the last 20-25 minutes, they were extremely entertaining and absolutely bonkers in the best way possible. To me, it's what I wanted throughout the entire film, which was more of Fede's sick and twisted mind, and he definitely lets the guards off in that third act. It truly takes the film to a next level, and it definitely has narrative connections to Prometheus and Covenant. Which, by the way, you may be asking yourself, hey, do I have to have seen the other previous films in the franchise to kind of comprehend this story? And to me, I would say it's a little bit of yes and no. No to the point that you won't be lost to the story, but yes to the point that if you've seen Alien, Aliens, and the prequels, there are reimagined scenes, there's nods, and there's callbacks to particular films that if you've seen them, it will make a lot more sense in the context of this particular story. Now let's talk about the things that kept this this movie from being great in my opinion, and getting into my criticisms, starting off with my little nitpicks. First and foremost, I will say the film to me doesn't suffer from pacing issues. Like, it's moving at a pretty good pace, and also if you've seen the other Alien films, they always kind of start off with a slow build and then they transition into the more tense felt moments. Again, I thought Fede did a good job of paying homage to Ridley Scott's Alien and kind of slowing down things and building to things. Then he transitions into James Cameron Aliens. It is a little bit more action heavy, and then the third act is just fully Fede Álvarez. But as far as the pacing in this movie, again, I thought it moved really well, but there are spots in this moment where, especially I think of a moment where there's the stereotypical exposition dump, and I thought that that moment could have been executed better. But again, it's just a little nitpick that comes to mind. But kind of get into like my main issues that I have with this film. I've always loved the simplicity of the story from the originals. We have a crew in Alien who just wants to go home, but honestly comes across as xenomorph. We have in Aliens a crew that's now trying to kill the threat. It's simple and straight to the point. Now, when it comes to Alien Romulus, it's not that the film was super complicated or complex, but I felt the story took too much from the other films and really missed out on the opportunity to really be its own thing, which actually goes hand in hand to my next point. There's a particular tie-in to the prequels that I wish the film, if they were going to go that route, focus on a little bit more, flesh it out, the lore a little bit more. Like, if you're going to tie into the prequels, let's talk about that moment. But again, and I don't want to spoil anything, I'm kind of skating around it. When you get to the point, you know what I'm talking about. It was like, if you're going to explore that, let's really dive into it. And I think the film just, again, relied on nostalgia. Like, hey, a callback, but we're going to make it a part of our story, but they didn't really flesh out that part of their story. Now, I mentioned how much Fede did a good job of really mixing in the old with the new, but I found him to find his voice mainly in the last half of the film, which to me was the best part of the movie. But again, I do feel as though there was too much on remixing or paying homage to what came before and really leaning on nostalgia to what's come before, and that to me really kind of made the film feel a little bit restrained and felt a little bit tame compared to Fede's style. And I just wish that it was just more innovative, and I wish that his voice was more spoken in Act 1 and 2 as how much it was in Act 3, which again is easily the best part of the film for me personally. Now, I forgot to mention this a little bit earlier because it kind of falls in my nitpick kind of criticism category, where I talked about the practical effects were wonderful in this film, like, and especially when the film blends into the CGI, like, it's seamless when those things happen. But there is a moment in this movie where there's a particular character introduced in the second act, and is clearly a CGI character, and again, it kind of plays into leaning to nostalgia and bringing back somewhat of a legacy character, and it just was distracting. And again, I don't want to say what exactly it is, but you'll know what I'm talking about, where it's just like everything looks so good, so clean. The VFX, the CGI, the practical effects just work together so well, except for that one element, which also makes me think about playing back to nostalgia. There's one or two lines that just felt so out of place, like in the sense of, this is again leaning into nostalgia. There's a iconic line, a like iconic moment in Aliens that Ripley says to the xenomorph with Nuke. You all know what scene I'm talking about, and the line she delivers. A scene in this film is recreated, and there's a character that's given that line. And again, I like the actor, but that moment did not work for me. The way it was delivered, and also just like thinking, this movie takes place before Alien, so how in the world would that character know how to say that line? It just didn't work for me. But again, those are just like, I'll put them a little bit into the nitpick, but also a little bit of my criticisms. But now getting to my biggest issue that I have with this movie, and that is, while the two leads were fleshed out, I really enjoyed them, but unfortunately, the supporting cast was very lackluster for me. Again, I rewatched Alien and Aliens, and those films all the films really have great ensemble casts, but those two casts really stand out to me because they're my favorites of all the movies, and obviously those are big shoes to fill. But man, none of the supporting characters in this film had any flair, any personality, no charm, no charisma, and they were not memorable at all. Like, I'm not trying to be facetious or funny, but I don't even remember any of the supporting characters' names. Like, I could think of, Bishop, Parker, Ash, Newt, Hicks. Like, there are just so many memorable characters in the Alien franchise, especially in the first two. But again, I don't remember any of the supporting characters. Like, I don't think it's necessarily the actors, they just didn't stand out. They weren't memorable. I kind of blame that on the writing. And again, they have scenes that they're in that are just like great scenes, but them individually is like they don't stand out to me. And that is something that really kept this film from being great, because again, when I think of Alien, I think of those ensemble casts, the standout characters, and you care for those characters and you want to see them survive, even though you're like, they're all probably going to die at some point, or at least half of the crew. But when it came to this film, I'm just like, your motives are very lackluster. Your chemistry with, we got brothers and sisters, boyfriends. It's like none of the supporting cast, again, I'm not talking about Cailee Spaeny or Dave. I'm talking about the other supporting cast. Really kind of took that away from this being a great film for me personally. So before I give you all my final thoughts and give you all my score, I want to take this time to thank you all for making it to this point of review. If you enjoyed yourself so far, do me a favor, hit the thumbs up, share this video to anyone and everyone you know that's interested in seeing Alien Romulus, but also consider sticking around by subscribing to the channel. Overall, to me, Fede Álvarez made it a point of emphasis to bring back the thrills and the horror roots back into this franchise without compromising the action, and really blends the old with the new in a very entertaining way for the most part. I thought when Fede focused more on his vision, his own style of storytelling, those moments were truly unique and memorable, and definitely adds to the Hall of Fame moments within this franchise. I really did enjoy both performances by Spaeny and David, and I love how the last act was just balls to the wall insanity. And I just wish there was more originality and more fleshing out of the lore and more development of supporting characters standing out. But overall, this is without question, in my opinion, one of the best sequels within this series. I'm going to give Alien Romulus a 3.8 out of 5. Now, I'll be honest, I was close to giving it a 4, which on my scale is a great movie, but I don't think this is an overall great film. I think this is a good movie with great moments, but I just really wish that Fede was able to just really let himself loose, especially, like I said, when you see the third act, that's Fede Álvarez, and I just wish that was spread out throughout the entire film. I wish it was a little bit more original. And I'm telling y'all, it's not that the supporting actors were bad. I just thought that they were forgettable, and I just wish that they were more memorable like we saw throughout the entire franchise. Like I said, Alien 1 and Aliens, those casts are so great. They're so charming, but that is the complete opposite with the supporting cast of this film. But again, 3.8 out of 5, that's a pretty solid score. And listen, when I revisit this movie, now knowing what I know about it, and I can look at things differently, it might go up on a rewatch. But hey, that's my thoughts on Alien Romulus. It is now your turn to share your thoughts. What worked, what didn't work, favorite characters, less favorite characters, thoughts on the direction, thoughts on the story, and ranking. Where does Alien Romulus rank on your list? Now, I'll be making a video in the coming days going over my list on where this lands on the ranking, so keep an eye out for that. But we're going to end this video here. Definitely check it out. If you get a chance, see it in IMAX, because those scenes in space are just chef's kiss. But we're going to wrap up this video. Thank you all again for watching, and hope you're staying safe, and I'll catch you all on the next breakdown.